Good evening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Amplified series. This is our third conversation of the series, Voices from Rochester's LGBTQIA community. My name is Perone Yusufzadeh. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am Geva Theater Center's Associate Artistic Director and Director of Engagement. I'm going to just say a few things, just a few housekeeping things before we begin, and I'll introduce tonight's panelists who will be in conversation with each other. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for being here. Recognition Radio and Audio Festival celebrating Black voices is ongoing, and the Amplified series is a series of conversations that each intersect with the socio-political and other issues of each of those plays. And so tonight's conversation is in conjunction with We Are Continuous by Harrison David Rivers, which I strongly encourage you to check out if you haven't already. Tonight's conversation is centering the experiences of Black LGBTQIA individuals. And those experiences must be, I think, centered in all of the questions that we also ask. And so I encourage you to use the Q&A function or the chat function to populate that with your questions, and just keep in mind that those are the experiences that we're centering in this particular conversation. I'm going to go ahead now and introduce our two panelists. And as I do, I invite you panelists to turn your video on and join me here. Advocate and activist Tamara Lee has dedicated her life to championing for the BIPOC, QTPOC, and LGBTQ plus communities. Starting her career in public relations with the formation of Rock Candy Media, an urban PR firm specializing in media management, brand development, and event coordination in Rochester, New York in 2010. Tamara coordinated events for thousands of people and was honored to do PR for the Avenue Black Box Theater, the City of Rochester, and Rochester Black Pride. Lee went on to become the Director of Operations and Public Relations for Out Alliance and the editor of Empty Closet Magazine, the longest continuously published LGBTQ publication in the nation. Tamara has spoken and provided educational services around the topics of Black Lives Matter, queer and trans rights, and the intersectionality of QTPOC at rallies, in boardrooms, and for classes and companies nationwide. In 2020, Lee launched Blackout Consulting and Blackout Magazine to further educate and create space for Black and brown queer voices. Lee is a proud mother of 2 young Black sons, and all of her work is centered around creating a world where they will be seen, heard, respected, protected, and judged by the content of their character. Welcome, Tamara. Thank you so much for being here. You're muted, by the way. You can unmute.
There we go. I said thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to have you. Our next panelist, Brittan Hardgers, founder of Next Generation Men of Transition, gifted public speaker, and dedicated trans and BLM activist. Brittan Hardgers has dedicated his life to advocacy and education. Appearing on The Rundown with Racky B on The Beat 105.5 FM, The Situation on WAYO 104.3 FM, Rochester Free Radio 106.3 FM, WRFZ Real Talk with Martha Hope, Tickle Me Tuesday on WXIR, and countless Black Lives Matter rallies and marches. Brittan was featured on the cover, and NGMT was featured as the cover story February 2020, and on the cover of the final issue of the magazine The Empty Closet, July 2020. Brittan was honored as the 2018 Rochester Black Pride Trans Advocate of the Year and speaks regularly at schools and in the media to educate on transgender rights issues. Brittan is an active consultant for blackout.org and authors the column Tran/S, True Resilience Against Negative Stereotypes. Brittan offers keynote workshops and talks on the topics of trans rights, all Black Lives Matter, BLM, being a trans man in America, religion and acceptance within the LGBTQ plus community, creating a safe environment for the trans community, safe spaces, and violence and the threat to Black trans lives in America. He also offers programming, support groups, and mentorship through NGMT. Welcome, Brittan. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm so honored and excited to be here.
Wonderful. Let's get your video on. so everyone can see you.
All right, so when I click accept, it says start, and then it literally puts the red mark back through the video.
Oh no, let's try that again.
All right, give me a second. I'll log out and log back in.
Oh boy, okay, all
Let's see
right.
if that does anything. Let's see if that changes anything for a second.
Okay, we'll talk amongst ourselves. So Tamara, you recently relocated from Rochester, New York. Tell our audience here where you are tonight.
We are in Florida right now. I was the director of operations and public relations for the Outer Alliance until we closed earlier this year, and trying to figure out what to do next. I wanted to continue the work that I had the absolute honor to do for the Outer Alliance, to see how I could continue that work. I have a background in public relations as well as advocacy and activism. And so I was able to sort of meld both of those and be able to start doing some consulting work. So I get to travel now, and now in the world of COVID, do a whole lot of Zoom consulting with different universities and businesses, schools, just to kind of help them broaden their horizons, to figure out how to sort of bridge the gap between the environment that they've created and the safe space that they would like to see. We really go in and look at what implicit biases exist and figure that could be blocking them from the work that they'd like to be doing. And so we kind of tackle all those things and work with staff, work with owners, work with management, work with boards, to figure out how that we can make the place, first of all, live up to the ideals that most places set for themselves, but just sometimes have a hard time reaching. And so we sit down, we figure it out, we do workshops, people like Brittan come in and speak, myself as well, just kind of break down those barriers and have those really sort of sometimes uncomfortable, tough conversations. But from that, newness is birth, and you can start creating those spaces where everybody feels comfortable to really be their authentic selves. And that at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I wonder what your experience has been in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. I have definitely observed both within Geva and in organizations across the country that there appears to be some more space for having those conversations and a greater sort of awakening to the necessity of those conversations. Has that been your experience as well?
Absolutely. The pandemic has been awful, clearly, for any number of reasons, for all the unfortunate deaths and the suffering and the sadness. But I think that it also has forced many of us to take a pause that we never really took the time to before. We didn't. Most of us worked in places where you couldn't imagine working from home. You couldn't imagine working with people who live in a completely different part of the country. And so all of a sudden the world got a little quieter, but it also got a lot smaller. And we had to figure out how to make all that technology work for us to close those gaps. And in that time, we also sort of took the pause to reflect. I think that all of this quiet alone time that all of us have been forced into, where we really have an opportunity to look at the world and look at things that are happening to people beyond just ourselves. I think it really has opened up a lot of people's eyes. In addition to the fact that while business is suffering and the economy is suffering, I think that we all have to think long and hard about where we are putting our resources, where we're putting our energy, and what kind of entities we want to build. And if the things that we've been spending so much time and energy to in the past really live up to our ideals as the kind of world that we want to live in. And the political climate, in addition to that, and living under the administration that we have been for quite some time now, I think that it has allowed all of us to really give some serious thought to what matters, and to what we serve and who we serve, and making sure that that's inclusive, and that people that may have never been welcome before, all of a sudden they find a space with us. And I think that's incredibly important. So out of every you know, it's just like Shakespeare. Out of every tragedy, there always is some sort of triumph and some sort of growth. And I think that a lot of people across the world and across the country and even locally have really, you know, taken this pause to do that kind of thinking that maybe we just didn't think we had time to do before. There was so much hustle and bustle of just, you know, every day keeping things going. I think that everybody, you know, really kind of just had an opportunity to sit down and reflect and look around them, and in many cases rebuild and try to figure out what that rebuilding needs to look like for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask, you know, for, you know, so many of us, our work is born of our lived experience, and our mission, and the way we approach what we do is very much informed by, in some cases, pain, in some cases trauma, in some cases, you know, any number of different sort of harms. And I'm just wondering if you can sort of speak to how you view the sort of constellation of, you know, your professional interests and your lived experiences and your values and philosophy, and how all of those things intersect for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that's probably the most beautiful part, but also the most difficult part of the work that I do. I often say, like, when we worked at the Out Alliance, very rarely would you be serving the community that you're actually a part of. So we were all from the LGBTQ community, and we were serving the LGBTQ community. So, you know, you make someone mad at the front desk, you may run into them at dinner in 2 hours. And that's a very different element to things. I think the reason why I can do the job that I do as well as I do it is because it really, it's truly my passion. And it's my passion because it's my life. It's my life. It's the people I care about's lives. It's my friends. It's my family. There's a beautiful tradition within the LGBTQ community, a house culture, especially in the QTPOC community, that we develop families. And it's very interesting because it's something that we can definitely get into in talking about the play, because we do this thing where oftentimes we are rejected, you know, from our biological families. And so we're able to adapt to these amazing built families that we create for ourselves and that we choose for ourselves, our chosen families. And so the people that I'm fighting for, you know, I'm fighting for myself and because of experiences that I've had, but I'm also fighting through and for the amazing people that I love and who love me. And so, you know, very rarely can you speak to something so passionately as when it affects the people that you love. And you know what you need. I think that it's a lot easier to understand where people are coming from. It matters when you walk into a place where someone looks like you and talks like you and understands some of your lived experiences. People can be very well-intentioned, but if they have no basis of understanding where you are in life, I think it's very difficult for not only you to understand what they need, but also for them to feel comfortable in that space. So I love the fact that the people that I talk to, like, you know, I think that there has always been quite a tradition of people being, you know, academically trained to speak and to interact with people. And that's a wonderful asset to be able to rest on, but also like knowing what people are going through and understanding their experience and having lived that experience, it makes a really big difference. It's a different level of understanding that you won't get any other way. And I love that. It also makes it hard though, because the wins are bigger wins and the losses are bigger losses. You take those things very personally. When someone from our community is hurt, is murdered, that's a personal loss for us, because that's not just someone we see on the news, that is family. And so it's hard. And a lot of times the work that we do, especially in the consulting that Brittan and I both do, a lot of times you're telling your personal story, and that's emotionally taxing. It's stressful. You know, there's a whole lot of unpacking to do after the fact to make sure that you are staying healthy, to check in on each other to make sure you're okay. Because it's heavy to go in front of strangers and talk about your life and your experiences and your pain and the things that you've gone through. So it's the best thing and it's the worst thing at times.
Absolutely. I'm going to I'm going to go backstage now because this conversation is Tamara and Brittan at the center. So, as I said to our audience, thank you for bearing with us through our technical difficulties.
Thank you. Thank you.
It appears the gremlins of Zoom came out tonight. Because it's Thursday and they think it's time to party. And please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A function as Brittan and Tamara take it from here. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thank you once again, everybody, just for bearing with us. I'm going to jump right into it. I really want to say that this was probably one of the best well-written scripts that sort of kind of touched home for a very long time. Something that I was able to resonate with on a lot of different levels. So one thing that I believe as a person of the LGBTQIA, and I would say that because I would say that I've actually traveled through transition, through some of those acronyms prior to, transitioning from female to male. I was born biologically a female, and for a long time I identified as a lesbian while trying to find myself. So one of the key components that really stuck out to me in the play was there was a quote that said, "The key to survival is keeping the secret." And I really wanted to see how did you feel about that, and what were your first thoughts?
It's interesting. I had picked out a bunch of little quotes that really struck me as well. And I guess I thought a lot about the people that are forced to keep it a secret. I came out much later in life than a lot of people. And as much as that saved me in a lot of ways, I was financially independent at that point. I was living on my own. I was an adult, so there was less risk for me in a lot of ways. I also had the ability to come out at my own pace on my own time. And so many people from our community, for any number of reasons, just because of, fear that maybe even just imagined in their own mind of what it looks like and what it'll feel like and what people's reaction will be when they come out. If it's religious based because their family is extremely religious, all of these very significant reasons, safety, people's lives are in danger often when they come out. So for so many of us, it is a secret, and it's a secret that they have to hold for so long. And then, with this play, you kind of look at it from the parents' perspective as well, and know that they probably were keeping the secret this young man's entire lifetime as well, and what that secret does to them and him and their relationship in the family. What did you get out of it?
The actual truth, survivor comes with secrets, and it's really sad to say, even for and particularly queer trans people of color, it's so much easier to live a secret after literally spending your whole entire life finding your own identity and standing on who you are. Just realizing that this is something that has been embedded in the African American culture for so long, because things were not talked about, things were not discussed. So the best way to handle things were to not handle things, and that's the only way that a lot of people in the community have survived and know how to survive. And it's sort of kind of the first encounter of freedom of speech is sort of kind of finding yourself. I can remember when I had that first moment when I really knew that I didn't internally feel like a girl, but it's sort of kind of saying it out loud because you're taught that you have freedom of speech. But that speech and that freedom comes with someone else's comfortability. And it teaches definitely queer trans people of color, and definitely the youth of the queer trans community, to honestly fight for that authenticity. Sometimes it's literally taken even from those very beginning moments.
I agree. So you brought up one of my favorite subjects, as you know, intersectionality. So we have to talk about that. But what struck me while you were talking was the idea of silence. And I think that was so pervasive through the entire play in different ways, different moments where the writer chose to add the element of silence. There was a pause in the dialogue for dramatic emphasis and to give people spaces to think, and places where the characters were silent opposed to having conversation. And as you brought up, in the African American tradition, our culture often lends itself to being a very scary place for queer and trans people of color. I don't think it's always, I think that people have this vision of the LGBTQ community where it's like this sort of, you know, rainbow, flowery, happy place where we all get along and everyone, you know, sings, I don't know, show tunes and hangs out. And that's not real. And it's certainly not real for the community of color. There are dramatic incidences of racism that we experience within our community. I know you can speak to that. We spent all summer talking about all Black Lives Matter, because there is a distinction there between Black Lives Matter and all Black Lives Matter, because within our community, there are barriers there as for acceptance. And again, you know, with our, you know, general strong religious backgrounds, that plays a lot into it, but just also societal norms within the Black community and what's acceptable and what isn't. But like I said, we can go on to talk about intersectionality because I think that's a really important theme within the play. But also, when you said it, it really reminded me the idea of silence, like silence versus violence. Like, which one is more detrimental? Like, people live in fear for coming out because they could be in danger. But I wondered, listening today to the play again, which is more harmful? That you know, what could be a very dramatic reaction that could be harmful emotionally and even physically, versus that silence? Because it seemed like through the whole play, the mother really, up until the very, very end, the mother really showed, and even still, she didn't really say a lot of words. Things happened, but she didn't say a lot of words. Like that silence, like in your reactions and listening and watching, like, how did you read that silence? Like, what do you think that did to the situation and the relationships and the main character?
I believe that silence is just another form of abuse, and that abuse can be mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, or any other way that we can fathom this point in 2020. And I think that is a big one for the Black community. Like, for so long, like, even like you said, like trying to find the intersections, but as a community, like as a whole, we were taught to literally be segregated. We were taught to be segregated by our skin tones, whether you were a house slave, whether you were an outside slave, like all of these things like came into the stereotypical view of what Black people or how Black people should move. And what the really sad part about it is, in 2020, it's sort of kind of like you tell your children, you can be anything that you want to be, as long as you're not lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Like, you can be anything that you want to be, as long as you don't fall up under anything that's going to make me uncomfortable, make our family uncomfortable, or literally like break our family name. So pretty much it literally stole a lot of individuality, like amongst Black communities. I think that like one thing that was very significant for me in the play is it sort of kind of gave the pull and tug relationship between Simon and his mother. His mother was well aware, and throughout the play, she, from the beginning to the end, she was well aware of the things that her child needed to survive. And due to the uncomfortability of things that may have happened in her marriage, even just the thought process that went a little bit deeper, the father actually went and became this minister among gay people, gay men, and bringing them back from being gay, but never took 5 seconds to try to understand his own child. And these are the things that we face in the Black community. So like
a little bit though, like I think that's a great point that you just brought up. Like the fact that he would almost have rather believe that his son experienced some unbelievable trauma than to accept that this might just be who he was. Like, I thought that was so profound.
Or also just to educate and save, or to cry with, like just the extension. Like, he would wake up in the wee hours of the night, he would answer the phone, but these are the same wee hours of the night that you are still worried about your child, like your child that you disagree with his lifestyle, but you don't have that same urge to go and make sure that your child is okay. So once again, that goes back to that abuse from that original silence, that you can be whoever it is, whoever you want to be, as long as it does not trigger, or literally as long as if it's outside of binary, Like, and it's anywhere non-binary in any shape, form, or fashion, then it's not relatable and it's not real. In the African American community, this is something that like we're fighting with. Like, there are so many LGBTQ plus IA teenagers. I came out at 13. Like, these children are coming out at 7 and 8 years old. These children are homeless at 12 and 13. And it's because they're not understood. And it's literally because as a community, things didn't have to be understood. You literally just conform to the way of life, and you either made it or you don't. And that's why like our homeless rates are so high, our jobless rates are so high for the LGBTQ plus. Like, you no longer know how to speak for yourself because you've been silent for so long. There may have been things and conversations that Simon and his parents may have had that may have caused him not to be as sexually active, because one thing that is well writtenly about the play is we never know if Simon's husband is HIV positive. So which literally allows you to accept all of the stories of his loneliness, his rejection, that isolation that sort of kind of then began to lash out in other areas from the lack of acceptance at home as well as the education.
It was interesting. You said that one of the quotes that I picked out that resonated with me was when she said, in regards to that children have the uncanny ability to break your heart. And I just thought it was so interesting, because that concept, like, your kid could be a serial killer or a grave digger or whatever, but what she connected that to, I mean, like, just the concept of that, the reason why she felt that he broke her heart was by being who he really was. Now, mind you, she was saying it in regards to he didn't turn out to be the person that in my mind I saw him turning out to be. But in reality, if you break down the sentiment,
it is.
Her heart was broken because he was who he was.
And I think a lot of parents don't take the time to actually articulate that actual thought. So many times as parents, we are ready and willing to see what it is that we want for our children. And sometimes that can be some of the most detrimental things, because then we literally, once again, suck that individualism right up. The funniest thing about the quote that you just said, Simon said, parents don't make vows to love their children. And if they do, maybe they are too young to remember, and that's the problem. I think that was very significant. When you see marriages across the world, like, everyone's writing vows, like even the emphasis on Simon writing his vows and how it made him feel. That is tremendous when you think about spending the rest of your life with someone that you choose. But what about the vow to spend your life dedicated to someone that didn't choose you and you really didn't choose, if that makes sense? Like I said, like, there was so much knowledge and so much freedom throughout the transition of the play to maybe at the end, maybe for me, the breakthrough that Simon actually felt. Like, I feel like I've had actual life experiences where I can say, like, those are definitely breakthrough, life-changing moments. I don't know. I really just want everyone around me to watch, to literally listen. Like, it's sort of it was completely different than seeing anything that literally was put together visually. It gave you your own visual through your own life experience.
That's fair. I have a question, just out of curiosity. I thought about it while I was listening. So there was a significant amount of the play that he really hadn't come out to his parents. Like, there was a significant amount where it was just him, and their relationship still seemed so incredibly awkward to me. Like, his relationship with his mom, like, they talked about how they laughed together, and like the words that they used kind of mirrored each other as to how their relationship was, but it still seemed very, I guess, cold to me. Mm-hmm. If he was straight, obviously the second part of his story would have been very different in regards to his parents as to how they reacted once he did officially come out. But do you think that their relationship would have been that different based on how they interacted even before he came out?
Honestly, no. I think it was that first initial that completely threw the family off. And I won't even say the family, because I'll just keep going back to the mother, the way that she broke down how she knew her child. So no matter what she wanted for him, she knew her child. She knew when soccer was done, like she, like she knew when like his major was changed. Like, you've had all of this information, and that information, I think that information, what's the best way to put it? That information caused a dry situation to already pretty much wither up. It's sort of kind of like you as a parent, knowing that even now, like, with social media and Google, like if you see certain things in your child and you're paying attention enough as your child is growing up, you may start to Google things, and now we can put names on things, like, like, okay, like maybe my child will at 9 years old identifies as trans. When I was growing up, there was no such thing. Yeah. So any way around it, it was derogatory. So it's sort of kind of like one thing that maybe they sort of kind of saved Simon from was the derogatory aspect of it, until, his father got into it and started sending the books. But that silence still caused like a Black man to feel less of a person for almost his entire life.
Right. Well, I think that we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the end, and about the HIV/AIDS quotient that is added into the end. It almost kind of disappointed me for him that he had finally kind of chosen himself and chosen his partner and chosen his authenticity and his life, to then have to go back to them and sort of feed into their biggest fears, probably. That made me so sad for him. But at the end of the day, certainly everything happens for a reason. And if without that part of his story, that bond may not have been restored. So, I guess that's the silver lining there. But again, I think it's important to talk about the fact that the stigma that comes with an HIV AIDS diagnosis, it's that same conversation again, right? Like the same conversation about in the Black community about what it means to be LGBTQ, but also the same sort of sense of what it means to be HIV positive. That's why our infection rates are so incredibly high compared to other ethnic groups, because again, that stigma is so dramatic, and all of those things that we know about, right? The implicit bias, the healthcare disparities, the poverty that leads to less access to healthcare, all of those things are feed in to why people like this young man even ended up where he was. And then you talk about like the lack of family support and contact. If he was able to have those kind of safety conversations and, real, like it was very interesting to me that they went to the whole like sexual positions conversation. Like that was, I was really trying to figure out, like getting the writer's head to figure out like where he was going with that. But I think it just fed in to the fact that they just didn't have those kind of conversations, and how that then impacted him later in life. Because we already, the Black community already has so many strikes against us, right? Like, the implicit bias from doctors, the lack of trust in the healthcare system for very legitimate reasons, the Tuskegee experiment and all of those things. So yet again, here we are at this, crossroads in his life, and, all of this pain and suffering that he had to endure. And if there was less silence, if there was more conversation, if there was, and he clearly came from a middle-class family, like this was not a family living in poverty. But again, even though he may have had some of the socioeconomic advantages that other people may not have from his community, that silence still ended up landing him in that same situation. And I think it's important to talk about.
I think that the major point of it for me comes down to education, and right now there's a lack of education in the Black community. Also, just the mindset, Simon said it in the play, that he may have felt like, or when he decided that this was the life that he chose, like, I'm gonna literally be my authentic self, that with this comes the thought that I deserve HIV. Like, this is something that comes with it. And honestly, like, that's something that is taught in the Black community. So right now, like, we do need more resources as this. We do need more media such as this. Because like I said, that education, the educational opportunities, like, aren't there. They're there, but they're not as visible as they need to be. Like, something on this. Yes.
I totally agree. Totally agree.
Okay, there was a question.
You gonna take it now?
Yes.
Okay, you wanna read it?
In the play, Simon has to be courageous with his parents so often. And you both talked about the importance of finding courage to break the silence. Can you talk about where that courage comes from?
I think that you probably will have a perfect answer for this.
For me, that courage really just comes from having to choose myself. On a very personal aspect, I lost my father at a very young age in my life. My mother is around and she's an able, willing body, but due to her own silence and her own lack of wanting to know and educate herself, we don't really have a relationship. So a lot of times people will look at, queer trans people of color or just people of color of the LGBTQ plus and feel like we have chosen to separate or segregate from our families. But when something so strong causes you to deny your authentic self, then sometimes you have to literally remove yourself. And that truly builds courage. It builds resilience, but resilience in such a positive manner. And you sort of kind of just want to share that flower, like share those seeds.
I don't know. Where does anyone find courage? I think that it comes to a point in your life that you feel like you're either going to be who you are or die. And that sounds dramatic, but I think that it's true. And I think that that's part of why the suicidal ideology is so incredibly high amongst people of the LGBTQ community, especially youth, and certainly even higher in the trans community, because it gets to a point where the silence literally is tantamount with death. And so you have to make a choice between being who you are or killing who you really are. And whether that's literal or figural, I think that that's what it comes down to for a lot of people. And that's horrible and it's lonely and it's sad. But it's real. And I think that you dig up the courage because you have no other choice. And if you ever want to truly find happiness and you ever truly want to be who you are, you dig it up from somewhere and you hope to God that there's people there to catch you on the other side of it. And for a lot of people, that isn't their biological family. For a lot of people, that's their chosen family. But that's the one thing that I think I'm proudest of in the QTPOC community and the queer trans people of color community. We build families and we build relationships and we build families, and it has kept countless people alive, and I'm one of them. When I came out and I stepped into this world in Rochester, I was never embraced as completely as I was by the gay community that I walked into. And I truly can thank those people who helped me up and encouraged me and told me it was okay and told me I was okay and told me that I was worth it for my entire life, because I wouldn't be who I am right now. I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing. I wouldn't have the understanding that I have. I wouldn't have been able to help the other people that I've gone on to help if it wasn't for the people that catch me. And if you talk to just about any single person from our community, I think they have a very similar story. There's always somebody, some elder that took them in, that loved them, that supported them, that got them, that when they didn't have the courage, when they couldn't find the courage, they gave that courage to them. They transferred that courage from them. They encouraged them. They pushed them to keep loving themselves and being themselves. And it's kept so many of us alive. I mean, I'm almost willing to say all of us, but definitely so many of us alive. And if you ever wanted to learn more about like the house community, Pose is a great example of what it looks like when those families form and people turn into mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, and they really support each other through life.
I was gonna say, Tim, those are like really great examples. I want to touch a little bit on there are, like, you were able to break down some of the community aspects and some of I guess I could smile, like, I mean, some of the reason why I have all of the courage that I have to be and to do the things that I do. But I wanted to talk a little bit on the differences as far as you know, the LGBTQ plus and like some of the tensions amongst the community, because, you know, like there still are a lot of what's the very nice way to say this? There are still a lot of privileged,
Absolutely,
white, cis, gay men and women who literally do not understand
or acknowledge.
I was gonna say, do not understand the struggle or literally walk around in colorblindness when it comes down to the difference with Black and brown folks. Like there is a lot of opportunities that lesbian and gay and bisexual, non-gender conforming individuals of that white privileged world that will never see or never have to deal with those opportunities that we as Black and brown folks literally deal with, on top of the fact that like we cannot strip the color of our skin. Just sometimes even the way that like we are talked to or approached or handled in something that somewhere where you would consider a safe space for all LGBTQ people, but then being in these places, you deal with sexual harassment, you deal with transphobia, just homophobia. Like how? Just because
racism. Just plain old racism.
So like there are so many aspects of the community, and there's, like I said, there's so many beautiful rainbows, and there's so many wonderful pride parades. But at this point, after 51 years, like it's been 51 years since Stonewall, like how much has really changed for queer trans people of color when you have all of these wonderful white people, no offense, outside, like, oh, this is such a celebration, but it's not a celebration for people that are still just trying to live authentically and be exactly who they are every day. So like those tensions, like those differences, like literally show that there still needs to be more intersectionality within the community of LGBTQIA, no matter what your skin complexion is, because isn't that we are a community within itself. So if this community isn't inclusive of all people, then what really are we doing? Like if we're all not celebrating, then no one should be celebrating.
Well, it's intersectionality at its finest. So you are already a subset marginalized community being LGBTQ, right? So that's difficult for a lot of reasons.
Yes.
All by no question. So then beyond that, you then break that down further to being LGBTQ of color. I wouldn't even say LGBTQ. I would say LGB of color. So now not only are you dealing with the microcosm of what it looks like to be a person of color in the United States of America, but also gay on top of it. So now you often find yourself in a position where you're not Black enough to be considered accepted by the Black community because of your gayness. And you are not gay enough, you're too Black to be considered gay in the general LGBTQ community. So then where do you go? Like, where does that segment of people live? I think that a lot of people, especially in the not people of color community, LGBTQ community, fought very strongly for like marriage equality. And that was an incredible thing. It's wonderful that you and I will be able to go on and marry and live our lives and whatever. Awesome. Except for the fact that that is like first world problems.
Right.
When you are a trans, especially person of color in America, the level of unemployability skyrockets, of homelessness skyrockets, of suicide skyrockets, of HIV/AIDS diagnosis skyrockets. So when you're still trying to live, to eat, to work, to breathe, literally, marriage is so far down the totem pole of wins. And for a lot of people, when that win happened, they were like, cool, time for pride, let's go. I mean, you keep bringing up Stonewall, and that's an excellent example. If you're not familiar with Stonewall, Stonewall is where the LGBTQ rights movement began in New York City, in Greenwich Village. But the thing about it is, if you look at the documentaries about Stonewall, if you look at the stories about Stonewall, it looks like a very yuppie, preppy, Wall Street version of a protest, except that's not what the story was. I have learned over the course of years that history forgets the people that they don't think are important. The people that started Stonewall, the mob was all of the entertainment industry at the time, the bars, the nightclubs was run by the mob at that point. And they had to deal with the NYPD to stay open. And so that's how you had to do business. And that's how the LGBTQ bars were open back then down there. And every night the cops would come, bust in, beat everybody up, take people to jail. At that point, if your gender identity didn't match what you were presenting, they could certainly take you to jail, and you would probably get roughed up along the way. And one night, when Stonewall began, what we call a Stonewall, people said no more. And the people that said no more were Black trans women, were Latin trans women, were throwaway minority youth down in the city. And that's who protested for 7 days straight. Over time, people from the rest of New York State came down, college kids started coming down, the closeted Wall Street folks started coming down and being a part of it. And they basically whitewashed the entire movement. So the Stonewall that you see publicly is a very different thing than what it really was back then. But that also took the fight, and it took the platform away from those people that really were the moving driving force behind it. And that's still the same thing. Most of the movements that you see, whether it's political, whether it's Black Lives Matter, they are empowered by the LGBT community, by the QT-POC community, but you don't see that publicly because the fight isn't ours. So you have people who look like myself, who look like Brittan, who are still fighting the same fight that Sylvia Rivera was and Marsha P. Johnson was 51 years ago for a voice, for rights, for a face, for a place, for resources. And so it's easy to say that we've had all these gains, and the world has certainly changed to a degree in 51 years. But for a lot of people from the QT-POC community, there isn't that much change. The poverty still exists. The health concerns still exist. We're still dying. We literally just celebrated Trans Day of Remembrance on the 20th of November. And that day we paid homage to almost 40 people that were trans folks that were murdered this year. And the grand majority of them were Black and brown.
We literally just lost from T-Door until today, I want to say it went up 3 or 4 people just from the 20th until today. And these are just stories that we know about.
I mean, and here in New York State, we've been fighting for the past month or so for a trans woman that was shot by her parole officer and is sitting in this weird in-between land of arrested but not charged, and she's being held in an all-male facility. And those are the fights that we're still fighting today.
In order to get the real history, all you really have to do is Google Stonewall. You can Google the Stonewall riots. It's right there on Google as far as the real true history.
And look up Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson.
Marsha P. Johnson.
Yep. It just takes a little bit more digging. The pretty glitzy story, because Stonewall was the first Pride. So that's where Prides were birthed from. So it's easy to go enjoy and have these parties and these big festivals. But in reality, this was people that were being beaten, arrested, and killed, and they looked like us. And those are the people that started this movement. And because of that, the entire LGBTQ community has prides to enjoy. So
I really believe that it all comes down to education and visibility. I really believe that, as I said, plays like this should be literally viewed, listened to amongst even health classes, English classes. At this point in time, queer and trans people have always been around. The LGBTQ people have always been around. Like, this is nothing new. It's just now time for acceptance. Black and brown children need to know they are important, that their life matters, like that they don't live in the closet because they choose to authentically live and be who they are. I truly believe that this story will save so many lives, especially lives of young Black gay men. It'll bring out the importance and the visibility of protection and protecting yourself, because HIV is real. And even though there's so many stigmas on, like HIV is AIDS, just the fact of the matter that there is a lack in a community of this knowledge. And it's not just for this generation, it's for prior generations as well. Like, that knowledge is not being passed down. So it is our job, it is our duty to get this out there. Like, it is our job to show Black and brown children positive role models of lesbians and gays and bisexual people and non-binary people and trans people and just queer people around the world, that like all trans women are not streetwalkers. Like, all trans men are like not in prison. Like, you understand what I'm saying? Like, there has to be positive visibility. There has to be stories of triumph. And there has to be the ones that don't always end well also, but that's the learning lesson. And these are the experiences that are not given to the children and the youth in my community.
And I think it's so important. And I think that this play really did an awesome job of just the humanity in it. I think that anyone, whether you are Black, whether you are queer, could see something about your life in this story. And I think that that's one thing that we lose, especially within the Black community. So often we're fetishized or stereotyped, that you lose the humanity. And when you can't see another person's humanity, you can't understand them, you can't empathize with them, you can't sympathize them. So I think this play did such a beautiful job of being able to pinpoint and verbalize from multiple different perspectives things that we've all gone through on some level or another. I mean, I think that we all have interesting relationships with our parents. I think that, we have all felt that loneliness. I think that everyone can probably empathize with not being able to be fully who they are in front of their parents, whether it's a sexuality, gender identities issue, or something else entirely. And I think that that's so important. Like, this play really it put a human face and human feelings on some very real things that don't get talked about very often.
Tam, I have a question. Do you believe, I've been thinking about this for the last couple of days, as a community, as a community in a whole, the whole LGBTQIA, Black and brown folks, across the board. Do you believe that it's time out for empathy and sympathy? Because sort of kind of like that's why we're still stagnant now within 51 years. Like, we've sort of kind of like we've allowed the world to deal with us on such a passive aggressive level, give and take, that right now, like, I know, being a part of the LGBTQIA, like, I don't want anyone's sympathy and I don't want anyone's empathy. I want you to either be willing to learn and understand, and even if it's not me that you understand, it's someone that walks this bridge, it's someone that walks this life. Like, if you're not willing to take that education to literally understand and literally deal with anyone in the world, but especially of the LGBTQIA as a person first, as an individual, then there's no need for your sympathy or your empathy, because you haven't even tried to take the time to connect why you're sympathizing or why you have empathy. Is it just because that's what you're supposed to do in society? That's pretty much the way that it's been broken down, like, in a systematic way. So right now, as a person of the LGBTQIA, I don't want sympathy or empathy, because at the end of the day, that sort of kind of just feels like it's something for people to do or something for people to say, and not really stand up on the action of actually, like I said, knowing why you're sympathizing, knowing why you have so much empathy. What is it that you feel in your belly? What does it need? What needs to be changed? Like, what is that urge?
I guess for me, there's a big difference between sympathy and empathy. I think sympathy can come with some patronizing pieces to it. Empathy means that you, in your core, have an understanding of how someone feels. I mean, until you walk in someone else's shoes, you certainly can't understand what it's like to be them. But I also think that if you aren't I think the people that aren't willing to learn are the people that can't see the humanity in somebody else. Someone else can be in a completely different situation from me. I mean, like just across the board, completely different lifestyle, completely different situation, not understand me at all. But if you can't see, but I still may be able to see the humanity in them. I can watch a documentary about someone who's on death row, and clearly that's not my life, but I certainly can empathize on different levels, maybe of where they grew up or where they came from, the things that they experienced and things that they've been through. And I think being able to see that humanity is where that fight comes from on an authentic level. So do I want sympathy? No. Sympathy doesn't do much for anybody. Empathy, yes, because that allows somebody to see your humanity and be willing to learn. Because you're right, it all comes from education, and people have to be willing to learn. Like you can't force, I mean, we know we teach people this stuff, and there are people that we come in contact with that certainly don't want to learn. They're just there because they're being required. And that's very different than people who come in who just don't know and they want to understand and they want to be able to ask questions. I think that's why it's so important that you and I both do the kind of work that we do, because we give people that safe space to be able to ask those questions that maybe they don't feel that they can other places, because from that there's growth. Hopefully.
But do you know that we also do the work that we do so that, and I know that you know this firsthand because we do it. But so there are situations where Simon doesn't have to get to that point.
Agreed.
Like, able to be that resource, be that ear, be that support channel is such an amazing feeling. I wanted to share with the panelists. Me and Tim do a lot of work together, but what was funny is we both literally like listened to the audio play today, and we have not had a conversation at all about it until just now. So this was a very amazing conversation for us as well. It was really, really enlightening just to see some of the things that Tim put out and that I put out. So it was very amazing. Thank you guys very much.
Yeah, it was wonderful. We appreciate it. And thank you for coming to listen. These conversations aren't always easy and they aren't always easy to understand. So just being willing to take the first step to listen and learn is a really big deal.
I just want to thank you both for your brilliance and your candor and your generosity. Speaking about these things, it is personal. It is deeply personal, and I just think we are also incredibly lucky to be in this space with you. So thank you to you both. I also want to thank the Seneca people for stewarding the land where I reside here in Rochester, New York, for generations. And I give thanks to their elders past and present. There is much more coming in Recognition Radio. So please go to recognition-radio.com. We Are Continuous, if you haven't given it a listen yet, is available, as well as the first two plays, Feeding Beatrice and The Bleeding Class. The Resurrection of Michelle Morgan will be released on Tuesday. And if you go to the community page, you can contribute to the memory board for We Are Continuous, as well as check out our next Amplified series conversation, which is next Thursday and Friday. It's a two-part conversation on the 10th and the 11th on racialized trauma and healing with Calvin Eaton, Shawnee Wilson, and Melanie Funchess. That's all from me. Tamara and Brittan, once again, thank you both so much. And to everyone out there, stay safe and have a good night.
Thank you.